Fashion is more than fabric and thread. It's history woven into every stitch. Join us as we travel through time to uncover the fascinating evolution of fashion. From Egyptian linen to Renaissance ruffs, every era tells a story of human creativity and cultural identity. Clothing has always reflected who we are, our status, beliefs, and environment. Let's begin our journey with the very first threads of history, ancient civilizations. Chapter 1. Ancient civilizations. In ancient Egypt, linen was a fabric of choice. Lightweight and breathable, perfect for the desert climate. But linen was more than practicality. It was sacred. Priests wore white linen as a symbol of purity, and mummies were wrapped in fine linen as a tribute to their journey into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that clothing reflected one's relationship with the gods. Pharaohs wore intricately beaded collars, while everyday workers wore simple tunics. The color of one's clothing conveyed status. Green symbolized fertility, while blue was associated with protection from evil. Roman fashion reflected status and citizenship. The toga, reserved for Roman citizens, was a garment of pride. A senator's toga bore a purple stripe, symbolizing authority. The color purple was derived from rare sea snails, making it extraordinarily expensive and thus a mark of prestige. Roman women wore stolas, long dresses that signified marital status. Jewelry was more than adornment. It carried social and spiritual meaning. The bulla, a protective amulet worn by Roman children, demonstrated the interweaving of fashion and tradition. Meanwhile, in China, silk was a symbol of luxury, produced in secret for centuries. The Silk Road connected Asia with Europe, and Chinese silk became a coveted commodity. Legend tells us that a Chinese empress accidentally discovered silk when a cocoon fell into her tea, unraveling into delicate threads. Chinese fashion evolved with dynasties. The Hanfu, with its flowing sleeves and delicate embroidery, reflected Confucian ideals of modesty and grace. The Tang dynasty introduced vibrant colors and intricate patterns, mirroring the era's cultural prosperity. Clothing wasn't just functional, it was cultural currency. Across Mesopotamia, Greece, and Egypt, what you wore conveyed your social role and economic standing. In Mesopotamia, woolen garments were adorned with fringes to reflect social rank. The evolution of clothing was, quite literally, the fabric of civilization. As ancient civilizations traded goods and ideas, fashion spread across continents. The Silk Road was not just a trade route. It was a cultural highway, transmitting fabrics, patterns, and styles from Asia to Europe. This laid the foundation for the complex, interconnected world of fashion we see today. Chapter 2. Medieval Elegance. The medieval era brought dramatic changes. Clothing was dictated by social class. Wool for peasants, silk and velvet for nobility. The wealthy wore garments dyed with expensive pigments like Tyrian purple, while commoners settled for undyed browns and grays. During the early medieval period, tunics were the most common garments. Peasants wore knee-length wool tunics, often patched and repaired to last through harsh winters. Wealthier individuals layered their tunics with cloaks fastened by ornate brooches. Sumptuary laws regulated who could wear what. In 14th century England, only nobility could wear fur-lined cloaks. The purpose? To reinforce societal hierarchies through visible distinctions in attire. In France, only the upper classes were allowed to wear gold or silver thread. Religious institutions also influenced fashion. Monks wore simple habits to symbolize humility, while bishops donned elaborate vestments adorned with gold embroidery. The church's power extended beyond faith into the wardrobes of medieval Europe. The mitre, a tall ceremonial headdress worn by bishops, was crafted to resemble flames of divine inspiration. The medieval period also saw the introduction of buttons and fitted garments, innovations that allowed clothing to be tailored more precisely to the human form. As knights donned suits of armor for battle, civilians wore padded doublets as a fashion echo of military attire. By the late Middle Ages, fashion became more elaborate. The Burgundian court introduced long, trailing sleeves and pointed shoes called polanes. These shoes were often so long they needed to be reinforced with whalebone, serving as impractical yet status-laden symbols of wealth. Fashion was a reflection of medieval Europe's rigid social hierarchy. While nobles flaunted their wealth with embroidered gowns and jeweled accessories, peasants wore homespun wool garments, dyed with natural materials like onion skins and woad plants. Every stitch told a story of social structure and survival. Artist Palette Chapter 3: The Renaissance Revolution. Let's step into the Renaissance, where fashion became art. This era, spanning the 14th to 17th centuries, saw a cultural rebirth across Europe. The explosion of trade brought luxurious fabrics like silk, brocade, and velvet from the East. Italian influence spread across Europe, bringing luxurious fabrics like velvet and brocade. In Florence, the Medici family set trends that captivated courts from Spain to England. Elaborate lace collars, embroidered doublets, and voluminous skirts became symbols of wealth and influence. Renaissance fashion was defined by intricate detail and vibrant colors. The era saw the introduction of the codpiece for men, a padded, exaggerated garment meant to emphasize masculinity. Women's gowns featured wide skirts supported by farthingales, stiff hoops made of cane or wire. Clothing became a status symbol, reflecting wealth and influence. The wealthier the individual, the more intricate the patterns and heavier the garments, proof that the wearer did not need to engage in physical labor. Sumptuary laws dictated what materials and colors could be worn, preventing the growing merchant class from imitating the aristocracy. The evolution of corsets and ruffs laid the groundwork for Baroque opulence. Spanish court fashion, with its stiffened collars and dark hues, contrasted with the playful pastel silks favored by French nobility. In the French court of Louis XIV, fashion was political. Courtiers were expected to follow the king's lead in adopting luxurious, elaborate attire as a display of loyalty. The Renaissance also brought innovations like the knitting machine, invented in England in 1589. This technological leap democratized hosiery, making knit stockings available to people beyond the nobility. As the Renaissance drew to a close, fashion had firmly established itself as a tool for communication, of wealth, status, and even political allegiance. Clothing was no longer purely functional. It had become a language in its own right. Top Hat Chapter 4: Victorian Innovation. The Victorian era was defined by rigid fashion rules. Women wore corsets for structure. Men preferred tailored suits. Queen Victoria herself popularized the white wedding dress, a tradition that continues to this day. Before Queen Victoria's wedding in 1840, brides typically wore colorful gowns. Her choice of white silk and lace set a new standard that spread across Europe and beyond. The wedding industry as we know it today was born from that single fashion decision. Industrialization revolutionized fashion. Machines replaced hand sewing, making clothes more accessible. The invention of the sewing machine turned dressmaking into an industry, and mass production allowed the middle class to access styles once reserved for the wealthy. Victorian fashion was marked by extremes. Crinolines or hoop skirts expanded to over 6 feet in diameter at their peak. These voluminous skirts symbolized wealth, but were notoriously impractical. Many women suffered injuries when their skirts caught fire from open hearths or were caught in carriage wheels. Queen Victoria herself set trends, from white wedding dresses to mourning attire. After the death of Prince Albert, she wore black for 40 years, establishing mourning attire as a widespread custom. Chapter 5: The 20th Century Transformation. The early 20th century saw dramatic shifts. Women's hemlines rose as societal norms relaxed. The suffragette movement brought not just political change, but also practical fashion. Long skirts gave way to shorter, looser garments that allowed greater freedom of movement. Hollywood became a global trendsetter. Stars like Audrey Hepburn and James Dean defined style. Films popularized glamorous evening gowns and tailored suits, and fans rushed to replicate the looks of their favorite actors. World War II brought utility fashion, practical and economical. Rationing led to simpler designs, with restrictions on fabric use resulting in shorter skirts and less ornamentation. Women entered the workforce in trousers, garments once deemed unacceptable for their gender. In the 1950s, Christian Dior's new look reintroduced femininity with full skirts and cinched waists. Post-war prosperity ushered in an era of luxurious fabrics and structured silhouettes. The 1960s rebelled with miniskirts, while the 70s embraced bell-bottoms and flower power. The youth of the 60s rejected conservative traditions, while the countercultural hippie movement embraced colorful patterns and natural fibers. Fashion became a form of protest. The 80s turned fashion into a power game. Shoulder pads, neon colors, and designer logos. Power dressing reflected the corporate ambitions of the time, with women in bold blazers asserting their place in the boardroom. By the 90s, grunge made anti-fashion cool. Flannel shirts and ripped jeans became the uniform of disaffected youth, as bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam made thrift store fashion mainstream. Fashion in the 20th century evolved in response to technological, social, and cultural changes. Each decade left its mark, influencing not only what people wore, but how they expressed their identity. Chapter 6: Modern Fashion and Beyond. The 2000s brought low-rise jeans, bedazzled everything, and fast fashion dominance. Brands like Zara and H&M embraced rapid production cycles, delivering new styles to stores every week. Fashion trends move faster than ever, driven by reality TV and social media. Shows like Project Runway made fashion design a spectator sport, while influencers began dictating trends from their living rooms rather than runways. The 2010s saw the rise of athleisure. Yoga pants became everyday wear. Brands like Lululemon capitalized on a growing demand for comfortable, functional clothing. Fashion became less about formality and more about versatility. Sustainability became the industry's new frontier. Fast fashion's environmental costs sparked movements toward ethical production and circular design. Innovations like mushroom leather and recycled fabrics now lead the way toward a more sustainable future. Technology continues to shape fashion. 3D printing allows for custom-fit shoes and dresses, while digital influencers like Lil Miquela blur the line between reality and virtual identity. Chapter 7: The Timeless Story of Style. Fashion tells the story of who we are and where we've been. From the linen of ancient Egypt to the silk of Renaissance Italy, from Victorian corsets to modern-day athleisure, our clothing chronicles the story of humanity. As history unfolds, one thing is certain: fashion will continue to evolve. Trends will rise and fall, but the desire to express ourselves through what we wear will remain timeless. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Remember, fashion isn't just about what we wear. It's about who we are, where we've been, and where we're headed next.